Hello and welcome to the Iron Maiden. My name is Abby and today I'm going to tell you how my Proquest went. So I've just had my Proquest this last weekend at my local game store. We had a pretty good day, pretty decent turnout. I did not top 8, I will spoil the ending, but I still wanted to talk about how some of my games went, how the deck performed, and what I'm thinking about the list in general. So for the event we had 26 players, which is pretty decent for this area. The Earth Heroes make up about 7 of those, so that's Vynnset at 4, Florian at 2, and a single Jarl. So this is a pretty bad meta share for Vynnset. You can see lots of Earth Heroes, several Guardians like Lyeth, Valda. You can see some other heroes that we struggle into, like Puffin's not great, Ira's pretty bad as well, Kasai's pretty hard. Like, this isn't a good meta. This is, in fact, apparently a good meta for Arachne Huntsman, who took down this event. A very skilled player took down this event on Arachne Huntsman. But, as you can see, this was not a good time to play Vynnset. This doesn't mean that I regret playing the deck, although it does mean that I'm looking at changing the deck as we go. So round 1, I paired into a Puffin, good friend of mine. He was on the boost style deck list, even though I play against, he's one of my locals. I didn't know a lot about his deck list. I haven't actually played against this deck list a lot. He was smart enough to block when I attacked, and then had pretty decent hands to sometimes very, very good hands whenever I took a setup turn. So I attempted to take setup turns when he had no cogs, or when I needed to for other reasons, but I never got away with that setup turn. He always punished me, and whenever I attacked, almost none of the damage got through. I did get him to single digits with a massive combo each turn, with a Revel in Runeblood and stuff like that, but ran out of life too quickly. And although I did get to single digits, I got him to single digits, it wasn't a particularly close game by my standards. Unfortunate start to the tournament, but, you know, these things happen. Round 2, I matched into a Syndra, another good friend of mine, another local. He is always on a bit more of a combo-esque Syndra, and what I mean by that is that he plays for some larger turns and swings daggers, so he's playing stuff like Spreading Flames. So this deck list is a lot stronger into Vynnset than a typical Syndra, because it runs maybe 12 blues, maybe even more than that, and also can run Arcane Barrier because of that. So he was able to occasionally block out, although it's still pretty bad for Syndra to block out that way. It does mean that if he needed to save some life for an on-hit, he could. I did eventually win by sending a lot of Arcane, trading back and forth down, and then sending a big block of like 6 and 5 Arcane, and then it's just too much for a Syndra. There's too many 2 blocks and not enough blues. So not a bad matchup, closer than most Syndra games, but it is a win. Round 3 is against Fang. He's on a hyper aggro version with, I think he told me he had 2 blues, which means he doesn't run AB, and he had less than 60 reacts, I think. I had a very bad start. He was on the play, block out, draw a hand. It's got 4 non-attacks in it. Unfortunate. Second hand, 4 non-attacks again. Third hand, 4 attacks. And then fourth hand, 4 attacks or 3 attacks and a non-attack or something like that. But basically, I spent nearly 4 turns doing nothing except for taking a couple blood debt. And although I almost scraped back, he had so much damage in the second half of the game once he turned his fealties on, hit the big fire and brimstone turn. So it was a bad start, matched into not enough disruption, and Fang could overwhelm me. Round 4 against Gravy Bones, another local of mine. I drew so good this game, unbelievably high rolled this Gravy. So I had a lot of good setup at the start, and they had nearly nothing to punish me with, no allies, or not many allies, not many conquerors. I managed to stick Nazareth on the board at about turn 4, and then it didn't die for about 4 turns because they consistently had nothing to kill it with. At one point they did send a Conqueror at my face, but I don't blame them for that because sending it Nazareth is really inefficient. But that meant that I got a lot of free damage, and then I was able to finish those single digits out with a big combo turn. So I could set up a little bit and then blast through with some massive damage. At the start of this game, about turn 2 or 3, I blocked a breakpoint with my creepers because I believed that this matchup was not going to be one where I needed creepers. I definitely did. I would have definitely rather them have another gold that game and had creepers, because even though I did high roll, there was some times where I really missed it. So that was a learning I took from this game is, yes, Gravy is definitely a matchup where you need to keep your creepers. And round 5, last round against Vynnset. This is a pretty soul-crushing matchup generally. Opponent had never played the matchup before though, so this is a big opportunity. If your opponent doesn't understand the matchup and you do, then no matter how bad it is, you always have a chance. I set up for about 4 turns at the start of the game, and my opponent just couldn't really do anything. They had blue earth card to attack with or to gain some life with, or they would send a blue arcane spell and then moon. So over the course of about 4 turns, they threatened me with less than 12 damage, which is extremely lucky. It also meant they couldn't decompose for a long time. And then in the mid-game and late, I pushed some huge turns. I got to set up a Nazareth, which lived for about 3 turns, and my opponent drew pretty bad into these turns where he couldn't kill that Nazareth very easily. I eventually got my opponent down to single life. I got them down all the way to 1 using Overpower and getting lucky that they didn't have a reaction in hand at that point because they'd drawn them all in the first 5 turns. And then they're on 1, so I got Flail, Cull, pay 1 life. So this is of course a play line that is a bit risky. If they have life gain, it will lose me the game generally, but because they would have to gain life and then banish a card, they would have nothing to block with at that point, so there was actually nothing that could save them outside of Sigil of Solace or blue Fruit of the Forest, which is still a somewhat notable chunk of their deck, but I thought it was worth risking it there because if I hadn't, I probably would have lost. And I did win, which was extremely exciting. Highlight of the day, beating Vynnset. This put me at 13th, so unfortunately didn't get top 8. Let's talk about the deck list though. The main board is the same as that recent video I made. I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same. It feels really good. I generally try and keep this main board very similar because it's how I like to play Vynnset. There's only about 5 to 6 cards that can change. So I think this is a very strong main deck. The number of attacks felt pretty good. There was a few times like in that Fang game where I drew non-attack hands and attack hands. But every time I drew an all non-attack hand, I then drew an all attack hand. So I think the numbers are fine. That's just bad variance, and that happens. The 9 go-agains being in the main board is extremely helpful. It means that your fatigue matchups are easier to sideboard. You don't have to make a bunch of space for go-again cards. It also means that if your opponent decides they're going to turtle up, like if they're playing Fang, they might turtle up occasionally. You have your go-agains to get over that. And I'm thinking about putting Widespread Annihilation into the sideboard. This lets me have a little bit more control over the numbers of attacks. So for example, in those Vynnset games, or even the Gravy games, you don't want so many attacks, because every time you draw a 4 attack hand, it makes you put the brakes on. Even if you were going to go off that turn, you can't. Or if you were going to continue rolling forward, put the pressure on, roll advantage, you kind of can't. So in those fatiguier matchups, Annihilation's only okay. So I was thinking about maybe putting it in sideboard, but I'll be testing with that. The sideboard itself changed pretty significantly from the video. The video expected a lot more brutes and therefore a kind of mixed meta of decks that block, decks that trade, and some decks like Syndra that can't. It turned out that no one was nearly on brutes at all, which meant that the meta ended up congealing into Gravy, Vidance, Florian as hyper defensive decks, kind of, as far as Vynnset's concerned, and then Syndra. At our Proquest, like I said, there was a lot of Earth. Was that 7 Earth? Which means that I think it was the right call here to push into a very fatigue-based sideboard plan, like anti-fatigue. So that's the reason I cut down 2, because it's pretty good against the decks that can't block, like Syndra, but it does nearly nothing against lots of decks, like Florian and Vidance. They're never going to take damage unless they're pretty willing to give their entire hand anyway. Having 2 also adds fear factor to the deck. A good opponent, if you've played your 2, for example, a good opponent will expect the 3rd, and unless they're watching this video now, they won't think you've only got 2, so the whole rest of the game, they're going to be worried about that 3rd succumb. If they have watched this video, you can then play 3 succumbs and get them. So they're never quite confident how many you have, even if this becomes popularized playing 2. Chains, I cut from 2 to 1. I still like having the 1. So because brutes weren't very popular, especially KO, not very popular, I decided to cut chains down to 1, because that's really why it was in there. I still wanted to keep 1, because I found that in some brute games against Levia and KO, they turtle up pretty decent, especially in the early game. If they don't have blood debt or if they have a lot of life, they can turtle up and take no damage. So chains is a good way to force them kind of to attack. You can banish and play it, and then they have to use their hand somehow, and chains makes it really inefficient for 2 turns, and then on that 3rd turn when it dies, then you can go and explode them. So I still think it's worth keeping keeping 1 instead of 2, and if brutes continue to not be relevant, I'll probably just cut it as well. Funeral Moon I also cut. You may notice it's gone. Funeral Moon might be my favorite card in the entire deck, but it's not good right now. Funeral Moon's power comes in flexibility, but it's far too passive for this meta. It doesn't do one thing strong, it does everything okay. And what we really need is some very strong anti-fatigue tools, and we also need some powerful disruption into those Syndra and Fang matchups. So I think it was not good. You may also notice I've got the Sonata package still in there, although I've cut 1 of the cussings. So I'm on 1 cussing, 1 Runeblood Incantation. Incantation felt extremely strong over the past week. I've been practicing both on Talishar and in the Proquest. I could see going up to 2 incantations, definitely. But I think 1 cussing is enough. The argument for having 2 cussings is that if you've played 1, you can still go get the second one. Like, if you see it early, your Sonata isn't useless in that way, but I think it's almost never the case. Sonata can grab so many powerful auras in Malefic's Incantation and Cussing. It doesn't need 2 copies of Cussing to work. But Incantation has been extremely powerful, and it's really good against Vidance, which makes me want to play more. Revel, I also put 2 Revels in. It works so good with Painful Passage. It is a very powerful anti-fatigue tool. And it won me several games this weekend. I originally cut Revel in Runeblood to play the Cussing package, mostly because I'd never tried it and I thought it was worth trying. Now that I've played it, I see the strength of Cussing, but I also want to get Revel back in. So I've brought 2 Revels in, and I'm really enjoying having both. Sonata adds a massive amount of consistency, while Revel adds some massive spikes of damage. Time Snap Potion I put back in the deck. It performs so well. Against Verdansk, it's a setup that they can't kill with Scour, and I'm thinking about maybe going to 2. Now, if you might be looking at the Time Snap Potion and wondering why am I not playing Diamond Amulet, it's because Diamond Amulet is worth about 400 times as much money as Time Snap Potion at like $40, and it does the same thing in 98% of occasions. So I own a Time Snap Potion, I don't own a Diamond Amulet. If you own a Diamond Amulet, it's technically better. But if you want to go to 2, like I'm considering, you'll have to play Time Snap Potion anyway. And then Beseech, I've got 2 Beseech the Demigod there. It was okay, it's very filler. It doesn't come in a lot of matchups because there are just other anti-fatigue tools that are strong. If I cut Annihilation out against fatigue style decks, Beseech would probably be the replacement for those into most matchups, which would make it a lot more relevant. But as I'm finding it, it's kind of too middling for a lot of matchups. Against Syndra, we're too busy putting in the 3 blocks, the 4 blocks, and even cards like Morve Skies is pretty good against Syndra. I think probably better than Beseech in a lot of ways. Whereas Beseech is kind of excellent into the mid-rangey warriors or the brutes, but those are not very popular. So Beseech could definitely be cut if you want something different. Or you could maybe look at including it by cutting some attacks out of the main board. So going forward with this meta, I'm really disappointed how toxic it is for Vynnset. It's very difficult to win over 50% of your matchups when nearly a third of them end up being Earth or full of blue block 3s. But saying that, I'm pretty happy going 3 and 2 into that meta with Vynnset, so not too disappointed in my own performance. I feel like my deck lost me that Fang game with the poor draws, and my opponent agreed. This isn't just me coping. And if I had won that game, which I think you do often, I probably could have made top 8. If my other matches went the same, like I would have made top 8, I would say, but that was a bit frustrating, the draws, but that's how Vynnset is. Sometimes your deck decides that you lose, and there's not a lot you can do. So because Vynnset's very poor into so many decks right now that are kind of popular, I'm thinking about switching off. If I'm not going to switch off Vynnset, I'm going to have to get even more anti-fatigue, like second Time Snap, stuff like that. But if I'm going to swap, I'm probably going to swap to Riptide. Playing Dreadbore in Riptide is so good against these decks that are full of D-Reacts. It's also pretty good against a wide meta, but I find that obviously Arcane heroes are pretty hard for Riptide, and Gravies who are any good at the game are really hard for Riptide. Gravies that aren't very good are pretty easy to farm with Endless Arrows, but a good Gravy is pretty difficult for Riptide to beat. But Riptide's my next most upgraded deck, so we'll decide as we get closer. I'm looking at going to a Proquest on the 25th or 26th, so I'll get back to you after that if I end up going, and I'll decide what deck I'd like to play. Alright, closing out, you can like, comment, and subscribe, as well as hype, whatever that does. These 3 things or 4 things really help the channel grow, trying to get to 666 subscribers, so I'd love if you please support that, and then we can do a special 666 subscriber special. There's a Discord link in the description below. That's an excellent place to talk about Vynnset. It's an excellent place to ask questions that are maybe too big for a YouTube comment box, and just have a good community to talk to. If you're going to Sydney Proquest on the 25th or 26th, I don't know which one I'm going to, or the Calling, you might see me there. If you do see me there, ask me about these Runechant tokens, and I'll give you one for free. I've drawn up a few Runechants. I use these to represent when Vynnset has made a Runechant unpreventable. So if you'd like one, let me know. Let me know you've seen the tokens, and I'll let you pick one out. Have a good day, and be good.